In the last few weeks since the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, the subsequent manhunt and sensationalization of the arrest of suspect Luigi Mangione, the ruling class has scrambled to condemn the act and obfuscate the root cause, the callous healthcare system in America. Other billionaires have been brought out to talk about their fear. Both political parties offer condolences and indignation about the assassination. Meanwhile, the working class has been repeating the slogans on the bullets left by the killer, making signs to hold CEOs to account for their crimes, and more recently, explicit approval of the killing, with 41% of people under 30 saying it was acceptable or somewhat acceptable. Our international podcast, Against the Stream, analyzed the event shortly after the killing. While some events had yet to transpire, such as the arrest of Luigi Mangione, the analysis of why this happened and what we can do now is still 100% relevant. Here are our comrades, Hamid Alizadeh and Fred Weston.
This assassination has really brought, I spoke to an American comrade who was at our branch meeting 2 days ago, and he said he's never seen the level of unity in the US. And at first I didn't understand what he meant. But what he meant was how the enormous class anger in all parts of society has surfaced. This wave of sympathy with Luigi Mangione and celebration of the killing of this CEO, to the horror of the liberals. I mean, you have one after another, all of them come horrified, saying, "Oh, how can you celebrate? How can you celebrate the death or killing of another person?" And yet, of course, they do celebrate the profits of all of these companies every day, or every year, and they do celebrate how much money is made, essentially by denying and limiting the access of people to healthcare, and how exorbitant charges are put on people. And I mean, it's just been an absolutely disgusting thing to look at, but also it's brought out class contradictions in society and class anger on an unheard of level. I know you brought some figures that I thought maybe you can read out for our listeners.
Well, America, the United States of America, the most powerful imperialist country in the world, immensely wealthy country, huge wealth accumulated in this country. And yet it's the country where ordinary working class people can literally face losing their home, being declared bankrupt because of their healthcare bills. I was looking at something, listen, 20 years ago, this is not a new thing. A professor at a university, they did a study, and this is what this article says about him. It says, he said that the implications of her findings, are that if such families are denied the ability to wipe out debts in bankruptcy, some will lose their homes, and many of these people will face collection for the rest of their lives. It's absurd. You have people, this is not about people who don't have healthcare insurance. This is about people who have it. The overwhelming majority of Americans do have some kind of private insurance. Otherwise, you're risking big time. When you have a situation where your healthcare depends on the executive or the bosses of a healthcare insurance company that very often say that your application for the compensation, the reimbursement for the costs of your operation or whatever it is unjustified, and they say no. The latest thing is in America, the anesthetic, who pays for the anesthetic? Do you know, they've reached a point to say if you need extra anesthetic, that extra you got to pay yourself, even if you're insured. That means some poor individual in a situation of being operated on has to deal with these questions, while the people at the top are making huge money.
Just to interrupt you, I mean, while you continue, but when Benjamin Netanyahu was put on trial, was indicted for human rights abuses, one of the charges against him was limiting the access to anesthetics. I'm just saying that in the US, this is being done on a systematic basis by these companies.
Yes, I've got a printout of the draft of the next issue of the Comrades paper in America. This is the front page as it was being prepared, and obviously the main headline is on this question. But you see, this is a company. The particular company involved, United Healthcare, is the company that denies the most, denying 32% of all claims. 1/3. Imagine paying insurance for something so important as your health, and then you get denied the compensation. They're receiving huge bills. People can't afford this, and it literally is killing huge numbers of people. The healthcare insurance companies kill people. That is the fact. They don't stab people directly, and they don't shoot them directly. But this is the real situation. And in the same time, they've made billions of profits out of this. This is a hugely radicalizing event for the United States, affecting millions of people. I tell you, the sense I got, I was in the United States recently. The sense I got is a lot of people were hoping the guy would never get caught. I'm telling you.
In fact, the police had a hard time finding him because people were trying
the comments were, somebody must have seen him. They're just not reporting him. And then eventually, obviously, somebody will. But look, what's interesting is the way the right wing tried to exploit this. They tried to make out that the people who are happy, glad, whatever, at the killing of this CEO are the left, the far left, this kind of thing. Ben Shapiro, famous right-wing, I don't know if you want to call him an influencer or whatever you call him, but he famous on social media. He published a little thing called The Evil Revolutionary Left Cheers Murder, trying to make out that it's only the left, you see, the nasty left, whereas the reasonable people, they support what this insurance company was doing. Well, it's interesting to see some of the comments. The companies are publishing them. One of them says, "I'm not buying this left versus right shit anymore, Ben. I want healthcare for my family." Another one, "Sorry, Ben. Lifelong conservative." That's it. The person writing says, "I'm a lifelong conservative and don't have any ounce of sympathy for this CEO. How many Americans have died because of his company's greed? Healthcare shouldn't be a choice between living and permanently being in crippling debt." Another one, "This isn't a left versus right issue. It's the working class versus the wealthy. And that's probably why you're trying to pretend it's something that it's not." These are the kind of comments. And then there's all the concerned headlines of the bourgeois media. Because what this has done, far more than any opinion poll that you could carry out, it's shown how millions and millions of Americans are suffering the consequences of the crisis of the capitalist system we're living under. And in particular, this question of healthcare, this is the life and death issue for many people. There are many people who know a relative who has suffered because of this or has died because of this. And therefore, this really brought into focus this class divide of American society.
I think there's a very interesting article in the New Statesman. It's called "Why the Assassination of Brian Thompson Ignited American Politics." There's lots of very interesting things. We don't have time to go into all the good parts, but there's one point that he makes is that he said that life expectancy. He says Thompson's life expectancy as a member of the top 1% was 88 years, or 15 years longer than the life expectancy of the average American male. And I thought, and afterward, he says one tweet alleged that Brian Thompson made his money by denying people care and pricing them to death. And then they added, "What goes around comes around." Now, I actually wanted to talk about this question of violence, because that's been one of the things, the liberals, you cannot talk about violence, you cannot do any violent acts of violence. This guy was not doing acts of violence. And you see, there is violence and violence. One of our listeners actually sent me a very interesting quote by Frederick Engels, and I thought it was very fitting. He says, "When one individual inflicts bodily injury upon another, such that death results, we call the deed manslaughter. When the assailant knew in advance that the injury would be fatal, we call this deed murder. But when society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and an unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by a sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessaries of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them through the strong arm of the law to remain in such conditions until that death ensues, which is inevitable, which is the inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish and yet permits these conditions to remain, its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual, disguised malicious murder, murder against which none can defend himself, which does not seem what it is, because no man sees the murderer, because the death of the victim seems a natural one, since the offense is more one of omission than of commission. But murder it remains. As Frederick Engels, The Conditions of the Working Class in England in 1845. And I think we've been saying this very often. It's not violence, is not just pulling a trigger and putting a bullet, although the ruling class does plenty of that, bombs and bullets and outright bloody bloodbaths. But it's the everyday violence of unemployment, which limits people's access to healthy lives, which stresses them, which puts them in unbearable conditions, running after the necessities of life, pollutes the air that they breathe, pollutes the food that they eat in every single way. Poverty, misery, exploitation at work, overexploitation, increase. All of this is violence, and it's a system that's maintained by the sword, by the bullet, by the armed forces of men of the state, maintaining the system everywhere. People say you can just check out. You can't check out of the system. You can't stay outside of capitalism. If you don't stay within capitalism and don't work as a worker within capitalism, you will die. So it's under the threat of death that you are given, how do you say, a more protracted, but nevertheless violent death. And I think this is something that Americans feel. Of course, healthcare and this particular company is an outstanding representative of this of the ruling class in this regards. But it wakes the same anger that exists everywhere in society about everything that the status quo has to offer. It feels as violence. It feels as oppression. And I just wanted to end. I mean, you can obviously also have that you will have the final word, but there's just one quote at the end of this article. There's lots of good quotes, but there's one quote. He talks about oligarchs and that the word oligarch has become quite popular in the US recently. He says, the word oligarch seems to have been cropping up more frequently in the US lately in contests like this, and it points both to the long history of such power imbalances and to a more constructive, less bloody way of responding to complaints of bad treatment. It is redolent of the reaction against the concentrations of power in the Gilded Age of the 19th century. That's the start of the industrialization in the US. Meanwhile, it's becoming increasingly common to refer to present-day America as undergoing a second Gilded Age. This was a time of extreme class struggle. And there are signs of a similar reaction. This is the interesting bit that you mentioned about right and left and Trump and the conservatives and so on. It says, the ideological tangle of the impending Trump administration contains a strand that speaks to all this with its promise to break up big tech and make America healthy again, even as Trump's ally Elon Musk seems eager to gut Medicare. We will have to wait and see which tendency wins out. Nothing can justify the shooting of a person dead in the street, but whatever the motive turns out to have been, the reaction suggests that some of Americans' aggressive populist anger might be directed at the existing model of healthcare. I.e., there's a class anger against the oligarchy, against the rich, against the ultra-rich, and that this is being partially expressed through Trump. And we've been saying this, that Trump appeals to the working class, has appealed to the sentiment, in fact, which is why he could win. Otherwise, he couldn't win without that that layer of the workers supporting him, but also that he has two strands that he's based himself on. One is the working class who want what they want, who want their basic necessities to be met, as the system is not. And the other strand that he's basing himself on is billionaires, people like Elon Musk and himself, obviously, the ruling class, which is the enemy of the workers. And that this is the contradiction which is going to be defining the next period.
Yes, yes. You see, when I was there, you could see the real concern of the US ruling class, not just the US, by the way. I would say ruling classes around the world, but the United States obviously is at the center of this. What this revealed was the real class hatred that exists inside US society, the real class divide. Now, politically, that can express itself in confused ways, such as the Trump vote. But nonetheless, a big section of the working class voted like the people I was quoting earlier on. Some of these people are on the right, but they say it's not a left-right, it's a class question. There's a bit of confusion there, obviously. If it's a class question, which side of the political spectrum do you stand on? Now, we can make that point, obviously, as an organization. But you see, this young guy that acted, I mean, allegedly they say, but he hasn't not admitted it. He even had a manifesto in which he attacked these oligarchs, in effect. Looking at that young guy, he comes from a well-to-do family. He was the best student at his school and got an Ivy League university, and he came from a well-to-do background, but he clearly radicalized by what he was seeing around him. We were commenting amongst the comrades. It was like a bit like those Narodniks who they were sort of like, petty bourgeois, middle class layers, radicalized by what they saw, and sought to take action. Now, here, this guy took an individual act, which has highlighted things, yes, but it hasn't solved anything. I actually said in America, the one conclusion that these executives will draw from all this is that all those billions of profits they make, some of them should be spent in increasing their personal security, because they are not going to draw the conclusion, oh, just a minute, maybe we should spend a bit more on helping people with their healthcare. They're not going to do that. But this individual act, you see, it did remind me a little bit, talk about the killing of people. It reminded me a little bit, when I was a young man, my father died. When he died, the doctors asked me, did your father ever work with metals? You can't imagine the rage that built up inside me when they asked me that question. He was a steel worker. He worked all his life with metals, and it produced his early death. I remember the executive of the company he worked for at the time. He appeared on television in a chat show. I was watching it with absolute hatred and rage, listening to him. This is what I thought as a young man. You killed my father, right? Now, of course, I couldn't go into a court case and claim that with the law. But that's the conclusion I drew. You guys are killing workers every day, right? But the question, I was fortunate that I met the Marxists and understood that the road is not individual acts like this act of Mangione. That energy should be channeled elsewhere, into building a party that brings together the workers, the youth, all this anger, this class anger which is out there, should be brought together into a force that can change society. This is not about, vengeance over one individual profiteer from a, health insurance company. This is about removing the bourgeois class as a class from power, taking over the wealth which they control and using it for the benefit of all. There's no reason why somebody in America should die because of the lack of a payment for healthcare costs. It should be, of all the countries in the world, the contradiction of the US is they have some of the most advanced medicine, and at the same time, people who have no access to it. That's the nature of the system we live in. To put an end to this, we have to build a party that can explain all of this in the language that the working class can understand, offer them a program that solves this crisis, and that can only be a program which is based on nationalizing the big corporations. This insurance company should be expropriated, taken over, use all the billions they've made to actually guarantee free healthcare for all American people, and take over the big corporations and use that immense wealth for the benefit of working people, not just in America, by the way, but globally. You wouldn't have the mess in the Middle East if it wasn't for the meddling of the US imperialists. So the fight inside America, the fight in the Middle East, is the same fight. It's the fight of working people against the capitalist class that govern us. Their time, their end is coming. It must come. But we have to organize to make sure that it doesn't lead to a collapse of society, in effect, a collapse of the state with no real alternative like in Syria, or the collapse of the regime, but a new society emerges from it, which is there, and the potential for that exists. But we have to channel it. That's what we're trying to do as an organization.